So come on in. Can we get in right here? Oh yeah, come on in. Okay. So I want to talk about this, and then I'm going to go to 2 Samuel chapter 7. So if you want to look up 2 Samuel 7, that's where we're going to go to. Okay. So you see patches here of a monumental building, and we're going to see one of the most impressive remains of this monumental building is its foundation, which is just over that side. But again, we don't find, and usually we don't even find intact foundations of buildings. You only find corners and sections of walls, and that's what you have down here. But you can see a capitol over here. You can see a wall patch with huge stones over here, and then over here, and over here, and then this wall coming across the front of us over here. We're inside of a massive building that was excavated by Eilat Mazar, same one we were talking about up here. And the way that you date the construction of a building is you date the pottery that you find inside the walls. And that's what she did. She found pockets of potteries inside the walls that date to the 10th century BC. And then she said, oh, remember that picture of what the city of David looks like? Where would you expect the palace to be? This is the high point of the city of David, up on the Acropolis of the site. You find a monumental building that the pottery dates to the time of David, and then you got the Bible saying that David captured the city and then built a palace there to rule from. See how logical it is? That's the way biblical archaeology is supposed to work. So she identified this as the palace of David. It certainly is, but then again, she received tremendous criticism for being so, biased that the Bible was actually historical and usable in this way. Okay, so the point is that we're inside the palace of David. What's left of the palace of David right now. Okay, and something very, very significant happened within these walls. And we want to read that now in 2 Samuel chapter 7. Okay, so verse 1 says this. After the king was settled in his palace. So that's why we're reading this inside the palace, right? After the king was settled in his palace, and Yahweh had given him rest from all his enemies around him, he said to Nathan the prophet, "Here I am living in a house of cedar while the ark of God remains in a tent." Nathan replied to the king, "Whatever you have in mind, go ahead and do it, for Yahweh is with you." But that night the word of Yahweh came to Nathan, saying, okay, so before we go into what God says, this is what is in David's heart. He wants to build a house for God for Yahweh to dwell in. Okay? This is verse 5. This is what Yahweh says to him. "Go and tell my servant David, this is what Yahweh says. Are you the one to build me a house to dwell in? I have not dwelt in a house from the day I brought the Israelites up out of Egypt to this day. I have been moving from place to place with a tent as my dwelling. Wherever I moved with all the Israelites, did I ever say to any of their rulers, whom I commanded to shepherd my people Israel, why have you not built me a house of cedar?" Now listen to this. I skip down to verse 11. "Yahweh declares to you, David, that Yahweh himself will establish a house for you." You see, we're talking about two houses. The house that David wants to build for Yahweh, and the house that then Yahweh says he's going to build for David. Now, if you just hear them said, the house of Yahweh and the house of David, which one sounds more important? The house of Yahweh sounds more important, right? But the key is in the builder. Who is the builder? Because the things men build, they don't last. But the things that God builds, they last forever. Okay, so verse 12, when your days are over, this is when Yahweh is going to build David his house, is when your days are over and you rest with your ancestors. He wants to make sure that David doesn't get this promise wrong, that he's going to live forever, or something like that. It's after you're dead. I will raise up your offspring to succeed you. So there's two definitions for beit, which means house, and in English also. House can mean family, right? House can mean dwelling place. And so what is in David's heart is to build a dwelling place for Yahweh. What is in Yahweh's heart for David is to build a dynasty through his offspring of sons to succeed you, your own flesh and blood, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. Think about that. I'm going to establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. When he does wrong, I will punish him with a rod wielded by men, with floggings inflicted by human hands. But my love will never be taken away from him, as I took it away from Saul, whom I removed from before you. Now listen, here's the promise given in these walls. Your house, your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever. Now, if you'll hold that for me. Empires don't last forever, much less kingdoms, much less dynasties, much less people. Even like the grass of the field that comes and goes, empires come and go. Dynasty. The short life of the northern kingdom had 7 dynasties. That's typical, right? For God to promise David your dynasty is going to, your house is going to last forever is impossible. Now, we only have time down here to sum up the archaeological evidence, but I want to call your attention. We'll see this in the Israel Museum. This is the Tel Dan inscription. We were at Dan where it was found. We'll see this with our eyeballs, but we saw where it was found. Dates to the 9th century BC. It ended the debate whether David was a real person or not. In fact, there's 3 facts of history that the finding of this inscription alone establishes. Okay? Number 1, David is a real person. Number 2, David is a king. And number 3, David is the founder of a dynasty, because it's the house of David that is on this inscription. 9th century BC establishes the historicity of David. This is an ossuary from the time of Jesus that says Shalom. You see this this inscription right up here on the rim. Shalom from the house of David. Okay, so
When did they find that?
Oh, they found this years ago. I had to go dig it out, just like the Ark of the Covenant, and the thing, I had to go dig it out of the storage room and photograph it. Okay, now, there is lots of archaeological evidence for the house of David between these two. Take, for example, the seal that they found here, which was found over where we were looking at the Solomonic walls. That's Hezekiah's seal that mentions his name and Ahaz. In the Assyrian records in the British Museum, we have mentions of kings from the house of David, including Ahaz and Manasseh, and others from the Babylonian excavations, Jehoiachin, and so on and so forth. So we have lots of archaeological evidence between these two. I'm not trying, but I'm just summing it up. House of David, 1st century house of David. This gets us from the historical time of David to the historical time of the son of David, Jesus. Okay, now let me read this to take us back to, let's go back to a site that we've already been to. Okay. So this is Mary So go back in your minds to Nazareth. Okay, so the Gabriel appears to her and makes the announcement. Mary was greatly troubled at his words and wondered what kind of greeting this might be. But the angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God. You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you are to call him Jesus, Yeshua, Yahweh saves. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over Jacob's descendants forever. His kingdom will never end."
Amen.
So that's the thing about Jerusalem. It's got the places that you can go to of the promise, the promises that God makes, the covenants that he forges, and you can go to the places where those were fulfilled in his son, Jesus, the Son of God, and Mary, who is from the descendant of David, the son of David. Amen?
Amen.
Is it, Michelle? Is it blocked over on that side because they've been doing construction? All the way down? Look all the way down. It was blocked the other day.
11 o'clock, we need to be at down there.
What time is it now?
That's the structure. I'd love to run up that way. I told my last tour guide, let's just run right.
Yeah. There's the steps, aren't there?
They were built to support this. So they wouldn't fall down
really?
the hill. They put that there support.
How you doing? That's okay. That means you're healing. It's just going down. You're gonna be fine. Oh yeah.
See me? When you come around the corner, I want you to look at the wall of this building. If you see the foundation that comes up to the bottom of the wall, the base of the wall, everybody see?
Yeah, right.
Look at that when you come around this corner. This is the foundation of a massive building that you're now in and that you're coming around. Another thing that I want you to see is that there's a different wall line coming off of this right here. Do you see that? There's a wall coming through here, and there's a different wall line coming through here.
Okay.
This is Nehemiah's wall.
Oh,
Those sections of Nehemiah's wall.
how about that?
When you get down to where I am here, you'll see the patch of this wall is different than the wall that's behind it. The wall that's behind it is the wall of David's palace. This is the foundation of his palace coming down through here. And then you see here this patch that stands out from it is a small patch preserved from Nehemiah's wall. Remember I showed you that reconstruction when Nehemiah rebuilt the city after the Babylonian destruction. It just rebuilt the city of David. It's called the city of David.
Yeah, and then this patch will
You'll notice on these signs, you'll see these bullae. These bullae are seals from letters that then were baked in a fire, which we'll talk about down here. But the same names that are in the Bible are on the bullae, and they come from this area down here. That is, when it was excavated, the Babylonian destruction. That window of time, of course, the destruction itself, siege and all that took place over more than one day. But I'm just saying that little section of time that we know the Babylonians destroyed this, then when you find a name in that destruction, and then you're talking about that destruction in the Bible, and it's giving the same names, and it's an official name, otherwise it wouldn't be on a bulle, and it's talking about the officials and what their names are, and you have a match, you have a perfect match.
Amen.
then you see this stone down here with a hole in it. That's an ancient toilet. Yes. Michelle,
David could have been there.
Michelle gets very excited about ancient toilets.
That could have been David's.
And so they even did tests on the remains that they found in the toilet about trying to determine what the people ate. And I already knew what they ate. They ate food. So, but anyways, you got a house up here. You got a destruction layer in here. Okay. And so the Babylonian destruction, we've been talking about the Assyrians more than the Babylonians, but of course we got to start talking about the Babylonians because God delivered his people and his city from the Assyrians, but he did not deliver them from the Babylonians. He did not deliver the city from the Babylonians. He did deliver his people through a remnant that survived the exile, and we can talk about that, but he gave the city over. And to this day, on the people, the Jewish people, because the city was destroyed by the Babylonians on the same day, the 9th of Av, as it was destroyed also by the Romans. And so to this day, they have a day of mourning and fasting on the 9th of Av, where they get together, and the question often arises, why? Why did God allow Jerusalem to be destroyed by the Babylonians? And we're going to be going through that today. We're going to answer that question, why. Okay?